Hello, it's Dan Winship here. I'm going to take this opportunity to do a voiceover of some old photographs I accumulated. As you can see, it's 2002 is when this was taken. So it's a carbon fiber landing gear. It's a process of making the mold. So what you're looking at here is an actual carbon gear as a prototype, and it's sitting on formica or phenolic or whatever you want to call it. And it's been clayed up to get the right draft angle. The hump in it, that little bend there, is the actual area that the tune pipe goes through. So the prototype is made out of carbon so I can figure out the cross section and how much flex and rigidity I want in the actual part. Let's see, now this next picture, it shows the ends. So what I'm doing is building up a dam around this landing gear with strips of formica and claying it up to get the draft angle. You can see the clay underneath the carbon gear leg there, and that's a little bit of an angle. Another close-up view of the clay packed underneath the hump area of the gear. Here's a shot of the complete gear ready for the PVA and wax. The wax I use, it's a really thin wax. It was an AdTech MR1. So it was a wax with a lot of solvent. So you can almost wax right over the clay and the mold part. And here's the little airbrush I'd use to spray the PVA. Nothing fancy there. It's just I think a cheap Badger. So then this whole part is sprayed with PVA. So here you can see the landing gear with the PVA sprayed on it. That's what the green shade is there. And then the box is formed with, it's called UHMW, ultra high molecular weight plastic. And for safe measure, if you want, you can put a little wax on it, but the stuff is so slick anyway, you really don't have to worry about it releasing. So see, clamped it to the form there. Now, if you don't have a perfect fit between the formica and the UHMW sides there, don't worry about it. I mean, you're going to put a surface coat in there it might seep through a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. As you can see, I keep a really clean workbench here. So this shot is that's the surface coat in there. Now that surface coat, I believe I try to get an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch thick, pretty thixotropic, and you can brush it up on the UHMW if you want. Take your time, get all the little cracks and voids on the corners there filled. And once you get the mold to that point, you don't want to move it. Keep it stationary. So here's the resin services. These are the two products I utilize in this mold. HSC 302X or the 560 AC, which would be, the AC is a casting, HSC is a surface coat. And this shot here, the surface coat's already in there, as you can see, and then the casting resin is poured in there a little bit. I worked the casting resin up, sort of stirred around a little bit, try to work the air bubbles out of it, and go ahead and fill it up. If it's got some air bubbles, don't worry about it. Try to eliminate it. I guess you could degas it if you had to. So here's the mold with the UHMW pulled out. You can see the little balsa wood supports there to hold the Formica up while it was being cast. Now the Formica came off. You can see the clay that was present when the mold was poured. That'll all be scraped out and then the part removed. And then what I do is I completely wax the whole assembly. I wax the mold and the gear. And then the gear will go back in that mold. And then I'll put more wax on it. And then also clay it up. And the clay, as you'll see coming up here, is pushed down in the little voids just to try to keep the rest of the resin from coming back or going around the part. Now this razor blade, you'll see, this blade is not sharp. It's been dulled. It's been sanded and radius, so it's more like a dull scraper, but I use it to actually form the clay. So I just heat the clay up a little bit with your hands or a hair dryer, and then form it in there, wipe it in there, and then scrape it out. And then you can wipe the mold release on top of everything. And there's something about this mold release where it sort of dissolves the clay. So you can wipe over the clay and sort of smooths it out and thins it. So here's the mold with the clay and the little voids around the edge. So at this point, it's sprayed with PVA. And then also the upright Formica is sprayed with PVA, and the UHMW, the same two pieces I used to form the bottom part of the mold, are utilized again. I clamp it to the mold that I just made, the bottom half, and then clamp it. And then you'll see these on the ends, there'll be little, looks like motor mount material, maybe just stiffeners for the Formica on the ends. And PVA, I try to keep fairly glossy at this point. So now I'm back to the surface coat on the top half of the mold, just like the bottom. Brush it 1/8 inch at least, maybe 1/4, 3/16, depending on what you use. Just go with the manufacturer's recommendation. So here I'm starting to pour the resin in there for the casting. Work the air bubbles out as you go. And it's important, don't move the mold once you get at this point. Once you get this thing set there, it's pretty fragile. You got the clamps on it. You don't want to start lifting it off the bench. So here it is, completely full. And usually you'll let this cure overnight so you can demold it. So here's a view of the bottom half of the mold, the carbon gear in there, and then the newly formed top half of the mold. And at this point, if the surface isn't really perfect, you can wet sand it and buff it with the right surface coat. You can get a really good finish. So if the PVA is not perfect, don't worry about it. So this shows how the top mates with the bottom half. A little green around the edge, I think, is PVA that hadn't been cleaned up yet. Another thing I do, I scribe this mold. I try to get rid of the mistake factor here by scribing that line, so when you're in a hurry and you're trying to close a mold, you don't close it backwards. This is the part in the oven. I think it shows 150 degrees Fahrenheit here. I sort of use call plates. These metal plates are just scrap steel that when you clamp it, you're not going to get little dimples to distort the epoxy as it's curing in the oven. And before I put these parts together and post-cure the mold, I'll spray some free coat on it. And I don't really cure it at the full amount I can. You can use the specs on whatever you're casting, but there's a free coat 700 NC. This is, you can spray that on the UHMW if you need to. So thanks for watching. Hopefully it was explanatory and provided some information. They're old photographs, but I thought they were still pertinent. Thank you.